I have completed my lesson on planning, and I chose to interview two teachers at my school, one a veteran teacher of 20 plus year and a relatively new teacher of about 5 years. I chose these teachers because I think they could add value to what I'm doing, and both would give different perspectives on their idea of what's involved in planning. You'll see I asked both of them basically the same questions, and after I listened to what they said, I reflected on what I thought I needed to do on my planning. I really was interested in what Christopher Corey said about how some of the resources we used had you putting time limits on what you did in specific parts of your planning, and you shouldn't really limit the time because sometimes some students get and some don't. So I'm kind of with that, going with that philosophy on with the planning, especially where in the facility where I work. So I don't like to put time frames on what I do. I kind of go with the flow. I have the lesson plan in front of me, and I rarely look back at it. Like they said, I use it as an outline of what I plan to do. I do state my objectives, and I don't think either one of them said that in their lesson, in their interview about stating an objective, and I'm not even sure if I asked that question. I'm going to insert their complete interviews in my podcast that I'm going to upload in a minute in my video. They didn't want their faces shown because it's a long day, and we had a rough day when I interviewed these two teachers. And I think that they both brought some good ideas to what they do. And you can see from my veteran teacher that she has a lot of experience. She actually helped write the curriculum for the CTE program that we teach in North Carolina. And Corey has learned to be more flexible in his planning and not stress so much. So here goes the excerpts from my students, my interviewees. And then I'll join you back shortly to end the video.
Hello, my name is Kathy Clark. I'm a business teacher at Dobbs Youth Development Center. I've been teaching for 26 years. I have a master's in business and marketing education, and I earned my national board certification in 2011.
Okay. I'm going to be interviewing you about lesson planning and asking you a few questions. Let's see. What are your first thoughts when you start planning a lesson?
My first thought is, what does the state of North Carolina want me to teach? I look at the blueprints that have been provided to the career and technical education teachers, and then I break down the objectives. Luckily, I've been provided with PowerPoints for each of my objectives, instructional activities for the students, so there's very little upfront prep work. Just getting prepared so that I know the material the state wants me to teach. That's the bare minimum. And then from that, I think about what is going to reach the particular students that I have. So I try to customize what they want me to do to what the students would enjoy doing.
How long do you spend planning every week?
Well, the first time I prep a course, I spend a lot of time planning. Like entrepreneurship is even though I only have one student this time, it's the one that takes the most prep because I've never taught it before. But I spend very little time prepping for Word, PowerPoint, and personal finance because I've taught them for many years. So probably less than an hour preparing lesson plans for either Word and PowerPoint, and a couple hours for entrepreneurship.
What components do you include for every lesson plan?
I found here at Dobbs, the more structured I am, the better. The boys want to know what to expect each day. So I've really made it very structured. One day we do vocabulary. The next day we do a puzzle on that vocabulary. My lessons each have 6 projects in it. So I do 3 projects one day with the vocabulary, and then 3 projects the next day with the puzzle. And once we've gone through 2 lessons, I give them a test. So every 4 days, they're getting a test on the vocabulary and the lessons they've had.
How often do you look at your lesson plans as you teach?
Never. I mean, I've prepared them. I don't need the lesson plan. I give DeMichael, who's my only entrepreneurship, I print out the lesson plans and give him. So he can follow, he knows exactly what he's to do while I'm working with Notorious and Jeremiah.
Okay. When you begin planning, do you typically plan for an entire unit or just work on one objective at a time?
I work on one objective at a time. It used to be I would plan out my whole year, but at Dobbs I've learned to be flexible. It's a waste of time. I go day by day, and whatever happens, I just go with the flow. But it's very structured anyway. You know, lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. When I get to lesson 11 of Word, I'm through with Word. I'm going to transition over to PowerPoint.
Okay. Do you collaborate with your PLC to come up with a common lesson plan?
Okay. I don't at Dobbs, but that's a big thing in the state of North Carolina. Is this for your class? Okay. Prior to coming to Dobbs, I was very involved on the Moodle. And in fact, in 2010, when we started offering the IT Academy, we had no lesson plans. And me and 14 other teachers created the curriculum, and we posted it to this Moodle account, and everybody would download. If you go Google my name now, you'll find old Word and PowerPoint lesson plans. But I miss the collaboration, having somebody to bounce ideas off. In fact, I've asked Mr. Corey, since I'm doing research papers soon, if we want to work together, since he's the English teacher. Even though we don't teach the same thing, we're teaching the total child. So we can collaborate, because he's got specialties about doing research papers. I'm a business writer, but I've got a lot of extra time here to teach at Dobbs than what I had in public school.
What are some best practices you can share when it comes to lesson planning?
Well, just know the first time you work through a curriculum, it's not going to be right. And every time you teach something, you're going to learn a quicker way to do it. And just, I think being flexible, looking and seeing, I've switched lesson plans in the middle when I see kids are not engaged. Something will pop in my head and I'll change to try to keep them available.
All right, well, thank you so much, Ms. Clark. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name's Christopher Corey. I am an English teacher at Dobbs Youth Development Center. I've been teaching for approximately 4.5 years. I have a bachelor's degree in English and in history.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about planning. So, what are your first thoughts when you start planning a lesson, Christopher?
I generally try to think about what it is that I can use that will allow the students to buy into what I'm doing. Sometimes that takes you kind of off course a little bit from what you would see as the written standards. You try to make your way back there, but if you don't get them to buy in to what you're doing, whatever you plan in your lesson won't matter, because they have a tendency to just kind of let you gloss over it and not really pay attention or invest in the material.
What resources do you use to plan?
I make extensive use of internet-based resources. I use PowerPoints, Prezis. I use textbooks when necessary. I like to pull from current events whenever possible. I like to try to keep things fairly fresh as far as what's going on in the world when I'm doing my planning, because I feel like the kids need to be abreast of what's going on in the world around them.
How long do you spend planning every week?
When I first started teaching, I would spend hours per night, probably 3+ hours a night, kind of being fanatical and going over every detail and trying to make sure everything was lined up perfectly and I had everything spelled out correctly. I do not do that anymore. I've learned, at least for me, that a lesson plan is an outline, at least here at Dobbs. I write down what I want to accomplish, kind of what my ideas and goals are for the lesson and for the kids. And then, depending on how the class goes that day, I kind of just use it as a guide to go from what I'm going to cover and see how the kids receive it. And if they're not receiving something well, move on to something else and maybe come back to it.
How often do you look at your plans while you're teaching?
I do not. As I mentioned, it is more of an outline for me. Once I've written it and I know in my head what I want to accomplish, the actual timing and things like that, I know a lot of people like to put 5 minutes on introduction, 10 minutes on this. I personally find that to be a little anal retentive. You can't regiment out a classroom period like that realistically. And I once I know kind of my path I want to go through, I spend as much time as necessary within reason on any particular section for the kids to be able to get what they need from it.
When you begin planning, do you typically plan for an entire unit or just work on one objective at a time?
I tend to go objective by objective. Normally I'll plan on a weekly basis, which will be a portion of a unit, like a sub-portion. Maybe, for instance, if we're doing literary elements, I might be the first part of, 1 week might be figurative language, the next week might be plot, etc. So it's subunits. I try to do it on a week-by-week basis.
How often do you revamp your lesson plans, and do you stress out if your lesson plans do not go as planned?
I've had to revamp my lesson plans constantly. As far as from when I started to now, I still have stuff that's not working, and I try something new, so I'm still trying to, some things have been successful. After 4 years, I've kind of got a lock on the way certain things need to go. Certain things I still haven't found a way that I'm happy with how the kids take it. On a day-by-day basis, lesson plans have to be revamped, reorganized, thrown away, moved on the fly, sometimes, within the class period. So flexibility, I think, is king.
How often do you meet with your team members to come up with common assessments?
Here at Dobbs, we don't have multiple teachers per subject, so we have one teacher per subject area, so our PLCs and team meetings tend to be cross-curriculum. As such, we don't really have a way to do a common assessment across the board for the different classes. Occasionally, when we go to conference for our entire department, we've worked on that, but they're generally are more of just suggestions as opposed to things that are written in stone.
What are some best practices you can share when it comes to lesson planning?
Be flexible. Understand that the lesson plan is for you and not the kids. The kids don't care what the lesson plan is. The lesson plan is so that you can moderate what you are doing and try to monitor yourself in order to give the kids what they need. And I feel like while they have value, you need to be flexible enough to know that instead of spending 5 minutes on one area, if it needs 15 minutes, it's okay to give the extra 10 minutes if it gets the point across.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Corey, for your time.
You're welcome.
I hope you were able to glean some useful information from these two teachers. I certainly did. They helped me to think about some different things and maybe change the way I've been planning and realize that, hey, it's okay. If it doesn't work out, it's okay. If I had to throw away a lesson plan and start over, and don't worry about it. It's just a plan, and plans are meant to be changed. So that's my take on it. It's all, and now that's the biggest thing I got out of this for best practices was it is okay, Cheryl, if it does not go as planned. the world will not end. So I don't have to be so stressed. Thank you.